Oh,
David Helman probably celebrates her birthday every year. You don't know.
Are you a Rihanna fan, David?
I've always been more of a Beyonce guy, but I mean, yeah, she's got a million great songs. Yeah, I like Rihanna.
Well, I just brought this up, and sometimes it's good to just change it up. We'll get back to the NFL in a second. I just saw this pop up on my timeline, the Billboard Top 100 all-time number one hits, the Beatles. Mariah Carey is 2. Elvis is 3. Rihanna is 4. And 5 is, who did I miss, Paul, at number 5?
Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson. So that's how we got into the conversation that Rihanna's already in the top 5.
Well, Rihanna pulls double duty because she's had like 25 big hits in her own right, but then she features on a bunch of other people's hits too.
Yep, so. That's true. All right, yeah, she's double dipping. It doesn't count.
Yeah,
I love the way you lie.
I didn't say it didn't count. I'm just saying, like every time Drake has a big song, every time Jay-Z has a big song, she's usually got something to do with it. So.
Hey, what are your thoughts? We had Drew Pittman, NFL agent, on a little bit about what's going on with some of the stories involving the NFL Combine. I know this is like this is your meat hook right here with what you do and Broadus and others. Your thoughts about the fact it may not be as entertaining, perhaps, as it's been in the past this year?
I'm not even really worried about it from an entertainment aspect, but this is, and it's just kind of a continuation of a trend that's been annoying me for a long time. Now, this is a little bit different. The NFL annoys me every year with the way they try to monetize the combine.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't really monetizing. This is COVID protocols, but at this, it just, I don't know. It feels arbitrary and ass backwards to me. And you do this job for long enough, you get to be close with the talent evaluators and the scouts that do this for a living, and you're just really putting those guys behind the 8 ball. And I'm not talking about the general managers and the coaches. I'm talking about the guys that really put in the legwork to do this 12 months a year and make their livelihood off of it. And it's another obstacle for these guys that makes their job even tougher. I mean, last year was a nightmare for the scouting community with the restrictions that kept them from being able to get into games. And again, it's not the end of the world if these players can't work out because they're all going to have pro days, but it's a nice baseline where you can kind of compare, okay, these guys were all working out in the same stadium at the same time on the same field. It gives you kind of like a baseline to compare off of because everybody's pro day numbers are going to be favorable. That's just kind of the way it goes. So it's just annoying that the evaluating community just keeps getting its hands tied behind its back, and they'll survive if nobody works out at the combine next week. But again, it's just another obstacle that makes an already difficult job even harder.
David, if the Cowboys fail to re-sign Randy Gregory, which, or they have to do something with DeMarcus Lawrence, do you think that bringing back Dorrance Armstrong is a real possibility for them? Or do you think that he will, based on, a pretty good season last year in a backup role, find bigger money elsewhere?
Those things are always, it's super hard to predict because it's very similar to the draft in the sense that all it takes is one team to have a very clear-cut idea of what he can do for them, and all of a sudden his market is out of whack. I mean, my original answer was going to be, I would like to think you could bring Dorrance Armstrong back no matter what happens with Randy and Marcus. He's never been a starter on a regular basis. He's never been a big sack-producing guy. I don't have his numbers in front of me, but I feel very confident saying he's never had more than 3 or 4 sacks in a season. So you're not talking about this guy that should have a crazy market value. I will say he's an incredibly valuable, mid-roster player for what he does on special teams, and he can also be very useful as a member of a pass rush rotation. I would be kind of surprised if he priced his way out of town based on his body of work. But like I said, you never know for sure because all it takes is one GM or one coach to look at his cut up and say, oh, this guy's the perfect fit for what we need, and the conversation changes. But I would like to think there's at least a good chance he could be back on a reasonable deal.
Is linebacker the position where the Cowboys are in the most maybe desperate need of making sure they have bodies before the draft?
From a pure numbers standpoint,
Yeah.
I would say so. Yeah, I would, just because you really just have Micah and Jabril Cox, who's coming off of an ACL. I guess Francis Bernard is technically still hanging around, but he's a guy that's never really done much for you in the way of defense. So yeah, I would say linebacker, and then, as weird as it is to say, receiver. Just because I think four of your main 7 are all hitting free agency this year. So regardless of what happens with Amari Cooper, you need to replenish the depth chart there.
So I was listening to like 5 minutes earlier today, and I heard this discussion. The Mike McCarthy and Dan Quinn scenario. Is there still any kind of question about McCarthy going forward at all? What's going on with that, David? I was listening to the flagship, and I just missed it a little bit. I wish I would have listened to a little bit more of it.
I guess that depends on what time frame you want to use. Like, there's no question whatsoever that Mike McCarthy is the head coach right now and will be going into 2022. But I mean, it's pretty obvious that there is an expectation to win and to do better than what they did last year, which is, I mean, hey, I appreciate the Cowboys shooting for the stars, but at the end of the day, they still did win 12 games last year. So Jerry Jones, I mean, you don't make those comments if you're 100% sold that you're going to have this guy as the head coach for the time being. And then for Mike McCarthy to kind of respond to that and say, yeah, I've talked to Jerry about Dan and the potential of him having this job. We've even talked about Sean Payton. I mean, I know Sean Payton retired, so it's a little bit less weird to be talking about him, but for your head coach to be like, yeah, me and the owner have talked about this, retired former Cowboys assistant who's sitting out there, I just feel like the implication is really obvious. And it seems to me that Jerry Jones is kind of hanging that out there as if to say, look, I've got no problem trying to improve this situation if you don't do better. And I thought Mike McCarthy did a good job of kind of answering that and saying, I'm not worried about anything but winning, so I'm okay with that. So yeah, I mean, no, I'm not. I don't think there are any questions that Mike is going to be the head coach here this year. But again, depending on your time frame, we could be having a totally different conversation as early as like October.
Would it be more reasonable to expect maybe a little bit of at least overall wins? We don't know. I mean, you get hot in the playoffs, and that's really what matters. But maybe, a team to go maybe 10-7, given the fact that they have a lot of roster questions. David, we've talked about them the last couple of weeks of they don't know who's going to play certain positions because they've got so many free agents.
Oh, and I mean, to be fair, yeah, no, like the record ultimately is not what matters. Like, nobody looks back at like those Giants Super Bowls from a decade ago and is like, yeah, but we only went 9-7. Like, if you get to the Super Bowl, nobody's going to remember that this Bengals team went 10-7 and kind of snuck into the playoffs. Like, it's all about what you do in January. So yeah, I mean, I don't mean to get hung up on the record. If the Cowboys go 9-8 next year and make it to the Super Bowl, nobody's going to give a damn about how the regular season went. But I guess I just say that to say the Cowboys' resume was pretty impressive last year, despite the fact that they didn't get it done in the postseason. So, to your point, they've got to deal with a lot of roster turnover. I think it's going to be a tall order for Mike McCarthy to dramatically improve on what we saw last year, which goes back to that's a lot of pressure to say like, hey, we had a pretty damn good season, all things considered, even though it was a disappointing end. And for the owner to be making it clear that he wants better, you better come ready. I mean, that's a tall order to set for somebody.
Well, I mean, and this is probably going to be one of those seasons that people look back when at least when you look at the roster as it was set up and how things were going for the early part of the season as a miss in maximizing the talent that you had at the time.
Yeah, I mean I heard an interesting conversation about that the other day on local radio here in Dallas, which is like everybody likes to get revisionist. Like you get bounced from the playoffs kind of embarrassingly, and everybody's like, oh, like yeah, they just weren't as talented as we thought they were. They weren't as good of a team as we thought they were. And it's like, no, this is the NFL. Like, you don't get to have a completely perfect team in the NFL. The league is designed to keep you from having a well-rounded team. The Cowboys, objectively, from a roster standpoint, are a better team than the Cincinnati Bengals. Like, I think that is almost indisputable. But again, like, it's what you do with it. And I think that's what hurts so much for Cowboy fans is, like, you look around and you're like, okay, maybe we weren't the best team in the league, but we had way better talent than what we showed in the playoffs. And that's what makes it tough to stomach. And I think that's kind of what fuels that win or else attitude of, like, if you can't get it done with that team, how are you going to get it done? And like, maybe not even win the Super Bowl, but at the very least get deeper into the playoffs than they did.
Yeah, boy, they have been a tease. There has also been just pure failures. The consistency of trying to win back-to-back in the division that looks like it's very easy, but who knows what happens in the NFL with the Eagles, Giants, and the Commanders.
Hey, what do you think of the Commanders' name, David?
I don't love it, but I will allow, like, when you, like, you know, the NFL, all of these teams, for the most part, even the Jacksonvilles and Carolinas of the world, those teams have been around for 30 years at this point. And then you're talking about teams that have been around for 40, 50, 60, 70 years. I don't think anybody's going to like a new name at first, regardless. Yeah. So everybody flipped out about the Guardians, the new name for the Cleveland baseball team, but, like, it's kind of grown on me. I'm like, you know what? That's actually kind of cool. So I don't know if the Commanders will grow on me the way the Guardians did, but I don't think you can really judge a name until it's had a few years to kind of settle into everybody's consciousness.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it as always.
Yeah.
Mondays at 5.
Thanks, guys.
David Helman, DallasCowboys.com. Couple of notes. Matt in D.C.